Hi, Juli.a.strology here. Today I want to take a look at the birth chart of John Paul Brammer from Hola Papi. If you've never read it, it's like an online advice column. And his book is called Hola Papi, How to Come Out in a Walmart Parking Lot and Other Life Lessons. Oh my gosh, my kitties need attention. One sec. Okay, and I think I figured out how to put his chart in the video, maybe, so we'll see. If I don't, you can Google John Paul Brammer birth chart. If you go to the astro.com link, you can pick which house system you want to look at it in. I use whole sign houses usually. I did message him on Instagram and I asked him, like, can I see your birth chart? And he sent back the like square co-star version, and so that was in Placidus, I think, and it had his Jupiter, the ruler of his ascendant, in the 8th house, which, like, when I look at it in whole sign, it's in the 9th house. But I'll just go through his placements really quick. So he's his ascendant is at 19 Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter retrograde at 5 degrees of Leo. Leo's ruled by the sun at 0 degrees of Pisces. Venus is also in Pisces, so the sun and Jupiter have mutual reception since they're both, Jupiter's retrograde, so it's like going back towards the sun, like, well, actually they don't make an aspect, but they're still in each other's signs, so it still counts. And then Venus is exalted in Pisces, so she does really well there. Like, I was watching a video recently with Jen Zart, and she said it's like being in your own house, or like the house that you rule is like literally like having your own house, and like you pay for everything, and like if something needs to be fixed, like that's your job. You gotta like figure out who, like, call someone to fix it or fix it yourself. But if like the exalted, like a planet exalted in a sign, it's like, well, I should have said the ruler. If you're in a sign that you rule, it's like being in your own house. And then, which, like, it is, you know, in whole sign houses anyway. The whole sign is the house, so if you're in a sign that you rule, you're in your own house. But anyway, the exalted planets are like being a guest at somebody's house. Like, you're just like, they give you whatever you want, basically, like, not, I mean, within reason, you know, like, yeah, and you don't have to worry about like the details of how everything gets done. So Venus does really well in Pisces. Okay, moving on. So then we have the midheaven in the 11th house in Libra, which is ruled by the Venus in Pisces, and then also the 6th house is Taurus, ruled by Venus in Pisces. There's nothing in those signs besides the midheaven in Libra. So Venus really doesn't have much to do. And then let's see, there's a lot that starts with, okay, Chiron in the 8th house in Cancer. Chiron's retrograde, also at 22 degrees of Cancer. And then Cancer is ruled by the moon in Aries. The moon's at 26 degrees of Aries, which some people would say is, it's a void of course moon. When the moon, it's only 4 degrees away from moving into Taurus, and when it does that, it'll make a square to Saturn at 1 degree of Aquarius, but we're not there yet. Some people would say he has a void of course moon because it doesn't make an aspect before it changes signs. There's like 3 different definitions of void of course moon. Some people say it has to be like 12 degrees regardless of sign boundary before the moon makes an aspect, and if it doesn't, then it's void of course. So this wouldn't fit into that definition. And that one makes more sense to me because, like, the moon moves really fast in a day. So, like, it's gonna make an aspect. Let's see, he was born at 3 a.m. So, like, it's gonna make an aspect that day. But, and then the, like, Hellenistic, the, like, strictest version, I think it has to go, like, full, like, 2 days without making, like, full 30 degrees or something. I don't remember off the top of my head. But it's a lot stricter. So there's one definition of void of course moon that this fits, and he talks about his mom a little bit, but moving on. So the moon in Aries is ruled by Mars in Gemini. It's at 9 degrees. And then Virgo is his 10th house, and there's nothing in there. So Gemini and Virgo are both ruled, yeah, I thought I said the planet. I said Gemini. Okay, Gemini and Virgo are both ruled by Mercury, which is in Aquarius at 21 degrees, co-present with Saturn. Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. Oh, and also Mars, in addition to ruling Aries, it also rules Scorpio, traditionally, and he has Pluto in Scorpio. So modern rulerships, Pluto is in its own sign and house. Bayou's traditional rulerships. So Mars rules Pluto in Scorpio in the 12th house, and the moon in Aries in the 5th house. And then Mars in Gemini is ruled by Mercury in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn in its own sign and house. And then Saturn also rules Capricorn, and he's part of the generation with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. So he has Uranus at 12 degrees, Neptune at 15 degrees, and then the North Node. So I guess like the moon could be making an aspect to the North Node. It's at 26 degrees, but it's separating still because it's 26 degrees 31 minutes for the North Node, and then 26 degrees 55 minutes for the moon. So it's already passing that, that'd be a square. Yeah. So pretty much most people would say that's a void of course moon. And then I kind of drew the charts. So this is like what he, the co-star version that he sent me. But like that doesn't mean anything to me. Like it's really, it doesn't give you a lot of information, just like what sign and house things are in the Placidus chart, and then it doesn't tell you where all the house cusps are, which is pretty important if you're using Placidus, so we're just gonna ignore that. And then I drew his birth chart, but okay, oops, and take off. I feel like that's just gonna cause a lot of noise for no reason. Anyway, so the notes I have so far just from the title, Sag rising, Sagittarius. Oh, I wanted to read from Channy Nicholas's book, You Were Born for This, Astrology for Radical Self-Acceptance. For anyone who doesn't know Channy Nicholas, she's amazing. She has a YouTube channel and an app, so you can go check those out too. But I wanted to read Sagittarius rising before we started. Maybe I'll read Pisces sun and Aries moon when we're done, just to kind of like wrap it up. Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign that knows how to inject its goodwill into the world, no matter the circumstance. Ruled by the gas giant Jupiter, Sagittarius knows not of understatement. On even the smallest of endeavors, with Sagittarius ascendant, you will bring your full being, unbridled enthusiasm, and levity to the densest of dealings. Not known for its precision, your Sagittarius ascendant will often have you setting off in the direction of your inspired desire, rather than checking the map for specific directions, but you'll get there. With seemingly unending energy, this fire sign motivates you to roam, wander, and wonder about what is over the next horizon. A double-bodied sign, the centaur is half human, half horse. Half tamed, half wild, you lead with as much insight as you do impulse. Generous and swift with both criticism and praise, you'll often end up in hot water for having said the thing no one else would. Swept up in the fervor of your intuitive channeling, your Sagittarius ascendant will have you famous for tearing through any and all filter placed on you. As a child of the benevolent Jupiter, your ascendant encourages you to leap into the unknown, assuming you will land fortunately. And usually that is true. It takes faith to have faith, and you have so much to spare. She doesn't say so, you have much to spare. I'm editing, okay. Ruling the legs and thighs, Sagittarius energy would rather gallop than plod along, making the consequences you come up against abrupt but quickly over. When Sagittarius energy is distorted, it creates an insatiable gluttony. Gloating about the glory days, the gambler risks what it doesn't have to play with. A greed for the next great high can consume you. To rectify this, you, as the archer, must aim your arrow at the truth and dedicate your whole being to boldly following its soaring release. So yeah, the Sagittarius is represented by the arrow. It's like always looking for a new horizon, trying to like aim higher. And so like just the title, gotta get this bad boy back out, just the title, like how to come out in a Walmart parking lot, and other life lessons. I'm like, that's so Sagittarius rising. And then Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter and Leo in the 9th house. So like the 9th house deals with writing and publishing. So it's like you wrote a book about life lessons. I'm just like, so Sagittarius rising with Jupiter in the 9th house. Okay. Or it could be the 8th house, which that description was pretty, she's like so energetic, so lively and stuff. There's a lot of kind of depressing points in this book. Like there's 2 chapters where there's like mentions of I think I can say suicide. My channel's not monetized anyway, so I'm not worried about getting it, like the video getting demonetized, but I just like trigger warning, you know, I'll mention when that's coming up, like before the chapter, if you want to skip those. There's 2 that I remember off the top of my head, so I can put timestamps that you can skip to. But anyway, so it's either in the 9th house of publishing, writing, and also like religions and like travel. He travels a lot in this. And then the 8th house is kind of like darker stuff. It's one of the hidden houses. It doesn't make a traditional aspect to the ascendant. So it's like hidden, and like the 8th house deals with like death and inheritance and stuff. So it's kind of like more depressing. So like with the ruler of the ascendant in the 8th house, even though it's Sagittarius and Jupiter, it's still kind of like, and it's retrograde. Jupiter is retrograde, so it's like not quite as like joyful as she described there. But and then yeah, I just mentioned that the Jupiter in Leo is ruled by the sun in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter and Leo. So they go back and forth. And then Venus is exalted, which I already mentioned. And then I mentioned Chiron in Cancer. So even if looking at whole sign houses, he still has Chiron, like the wounded healer. Like this is your deepest wound, but then also how you heal in the 8th house, which some people put like sex and sexuality and stuff in the 8th house. Other people put it in the 5th house. He does have his moon in the 5th house. There's a lot of sex. Yeah. So Chiron ruled by the moon. So either way, you know, it makes sense. And then the moon is ruled by Mars. I already mentioned all this. But I feel like it comes up a lot. So, okay. Well, it makes sense that it comes up a lot because this is his birth chart and he's talking about his life. So the book starts off, he has this advice column called Hola Papi, and he's basically just talking about like how that came into being. There's a guy he knew in college that told him about Grindr and told him to stay off it. He says he was a junior in college at the time. So he's starting off, the 9th house also deals with like higher education, like college, and like I said, foreign travel or long distance travel. What's up, little buddy? My cat's purring. Okay. And he says he was 21 years old at the time, so that's a 9th house perfection year. So I just think it's interesting. So I talked about perfection years a lot in my last video, Jeanette McCurdy's book, which is like over here. If you want to watch that, the book's here, not the video. Hold on. This is Paul. Okay. Whoop. Anyway, so yeah, 9th house perfection year. I didn't mention what perfection years are. I realized later I should have just given a quick description. So basically, like you have your birth chart. Your first house is the house with the ascendant, at least in whole sign houses, or the sign with the ascendant. So when you're born, you're 0. That's a first house perfection year. So from 0 to 1 is a first house perfection year. Then you turn 1, from 1 to 2 is a second house perfection year. 2 to 3 is the third house, and then it goes around. So 11 is when you're 11 is a 12th house perfection year, and then it starts over. 12 is the first house perfection year again. It goes around. So like I have a few like memorized, like 6, 12, 18, 30 or 7th house perfection years. That doesn't sound right. 6, 1830. 12, I already said, is the first house. 6, 1830, or his 7th house. The first age he mentions is 21. 20. 21 is the 10th house perfection year, and then so 20 is 9th. And like I said, he's writing a book, he's in college. I mean, he's a junior in college, so it's not like college started, but in a 9th house perfection year. And then, but he does like download Grindr, which is where he like started the Hola Papi. What do you want? That's when he started Hola Papi, or where this, okay, so 20 is when he downloaded Grindr, which is where he started the Hola Papi column, and then that's what the book is titled, so it's like, it all makes sense. Anyway, so yeah, he's with his friend Eric. Eric tells him what Grindr is and tells him not to download it, so of course as soon as he leaves, he downloads Grindr. And then like a bunch of people, like white people, message him saying Hola Papi, and then he kind of made that the title because it's kind of funny. And he thought the advice column would be kind of a spoof, but he started getting letters that were like more serious. But we'll go through quotes. Let's see. So he said, I worried, reader. Okay, I should mention also that it's kind of formatted like an advice column. So like it starts with a question. This one says, are you even qualified to help me? Signed, reader. Well, it says Hola Papi, are you even qualified to help me? So there's a lot of times where he'll like address the writer of the letter, which I don't think these are like real letters. I think these are made up just for the book. But anyway, he said, I worried, reader, that I had gotten too late a start on this being gay business. I was an all or nothing kind of person. I wasn't gay until one day when I decided that no, actually I was. Aside from one failed romantic endeavor with my best friend from high school, I hadn't really fooled around with guys while I was in the closet. I didn't watch gay porn or hit up gay bars. I didn't watch gay porn or hit up gay bars only to go back to pretending I was straight. But once I'd committed to being gay, I immediately started throwing myself at whoever would have me, which at least brought a colorful new cast of characters into my life. Eric's pallor notwithstanding. Okay. So I have, that's very like Gemini, Mars and Gemini in the 7th house. Gemini is a mutable sign. Mutable signs are like double-bodied, which I think Chani mentioned in the Sagittarius thing. If not, she definitely mentions it in the Pisces one, which we'll read at the end. So the double-bodied signs, especially Gemini is the twins. That's what it means. And so it's like he's like, it was all or nothing, you know, like one day I wasn't gay and then the next day I decided, yes, I am. It's like very Gemini to me. And then the like, I would throw myself at whoever would have me is very Martian, like Mars in the 7th house. And then also Mars represents men and the 7th house is like relationships. So him wanting to be in relationships with men, it's like, okay, like not everyone who has Mars in the 7th house is gonna be gay. Women with Mars in the 7th house like probably would be more attracted to men, but like it might mean you have problems in relationships because Mars is one of the malefics. So traditionally the malefics are Saturn and Mars, and the benefics are Jupiter and Venus, depending on when you were born. Like if you were born during the day, let's see, the day team, Jupiter is going to be your best planet, Venus is second best, Saturn is bad but not too bad, and then Mars is the worst. But he's a Sagittarius rising with Sun in Pisces, which is under the horizon. So he's a night chart, which means Saturn's going to be his worst planet, Mars is bad but not as bad, Jupiter's good, but not that good, and then Venus is the best planet. Yeah, so Mars is like bad, like he has trouble with relationships, but it's not like the worst thing in his life. Let's see, so yeah, he downloads Grindr, he's hooked. He says when he studied abroad in Barcelona, he would hang out in cafes with Wi-Fi and open Grindr. When he moved to DC for a blogging job and then New York for another gig, the grid was constantly in his life. The men came and went with varying degrees of success. So that's very like Jupiter in the 9th house to me. Like there's a lot of travel going on. And then he said, let's see, I wouldn't have called myself a sex addict, reader. I wasn't having near enough sex to qualify for that. I was more of an affirmation junkie. I was into the idea of being wanted by people who didn't have any obligation to want me. And then this is what I have underlined. After a life spent languishing with repressed desires, it felt good to openly want and be wanted. So that was very Chiron in the 8th house to me. Like, Chiron is the wounded healer, like I said, but like first it's the wound. And then the 8th house is like the occult, or like things that are hidden. And so like being gay is kind of like frowned upon, unfortunately, by our society, and especially where he grew up in the Midwest. He felt like there was something wrong with him, which is like a very Chiron thing. So and then he was finally able to like I don't know if he necessarily healed the wound, but he uses the wound to help others heal, like with the advice column. And then, okay, so I have a note for the midheaven in the 11th house. He says his friend Matthew asked if he'd be interested in pitching a regular column. So like it was his friend that got him the job that like he's known for. Like that's what he called his book, is Hola Papi. That's like his brand, you know. The midheaven is the highest point in the sky, so it's like the highest point in your life, and like also like the most visible point, so it's like how other people perceive you and stuff. So it's like if you have the midheaven, if you're looking at whole sign houses, the midheaven can fall in the 9th, 10th, or 11th house. In other house systems, it's usually the beginning of the 10th house, not always. So like that's one way. Like if you have the midheaven in the 9th house, you're probably going to be known more for being a writer or for like traveling or religious stuff. And then midheaven in the 11th is probably more for like groups of people, like communities. Like I think he has a pretty, like you could say has his own community of like queer people that he like that read his stuff, like his readers. It's also fans, so that makes sense to me. And then like his friend getting him the job that he's known for, really like it's like wow, okay. And then I have another note for midheaven in the 11th. It says the possibilities seemed endless. Ever since I'd first come out, I'd been looking to be a part of something bigger than myself, wanting to connect to my community on a deeper level. Maybe this was it. So that's what I was just saying about community. This one doesn't have a note, but I have this bracketed off to read. Okay, so this is the letter that he got that I mentioned earlier that had like, did I mention it earlier? He got a letter that said, Hola Papi. It said, as so many of the letters began, homosexuality is illegal in my country, but I find myself attracted to a man I work with. I think he might like me back. He's showing me all these signs. Should I tell him how I feel? So that's kind of like more than he pitched this like column as a spoof, kind of like a little jokey advice column. And then he's like, oh, there's like actually real life and death consequences, like Chiron in the 8th. But yeah, he didn't feel qualified to answer that question, hence the beginning being, are you even qualified to help me? And yeah, he just felt like an imposter at this point. So that's pretty much how it ends. This the next chapter is called How to Lose a Rabbit. The question is, Hola Papi, how do I get out of my how do I let go? I can't read. I shouldn't be doing this. Hola Papi, how do I let go of my childhood trauma? Signed, Damaged Goods. So basically, he's talking about his middle school. The rabbit, okay, he's in New York and he goes back to visit his middle school. Many years later, as an adult, I was living in a box for shoes, apartment in New York. One afternoon, my subway car got stuck in the tunnel between Manhattan and Brooklyn, trapping me next to a wild-eyed preacher in a trench coat who took the opportunity to tell me about how the bisexuals were infiltrating the Department of Defense. I decided in that moment that spending some time in the Oklahoma countryside would do me some good. So he went back to visit his hometown in Oklahoma. It's called Cache. I think it's pronounced Cache. That's how I'll be pronouncing it. But he goes back to visit his middle school. The rabbit isn't a real rabbit. He says there was like a mosaic of tiles and he would look at it and try to find pictures, and his favorite one was a rabbit. And then he goes back through what happened in middle school. So basically there's a new kid it's a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade middle school. He said 6th and 7th grade. He wasn't like super popular, but it wasn't that bad. But in 8th grade, there was a new kid who joined the school. His name's Patty, or Patrick. He went by Patty. And he would do things that like would get anyone else made fun of, but like for some reason when Patty did them, they were cool. Like he could come to school wearing pink. And he had, let me check when, okay. He would wear these Tar Heels, which, okay, it's a men's basketball team. I kept looking, I was like, what is that? Is that like a hockey team? Is that a band? I don't know. Now I know it's a men's basketball team. And their logo is light blue. So he would wear like a Tar Heels hat. And that's like still a girly color. So it's like no one else is allowed to wear those things except for Patty. And he, like JP wanted this guy, he wanted his approval, and he thought like when he first joined the school, he was like, finally, someone worse than me, and he wanted to like be friends with him because he didn't really have any friends. And he thought this guy was like low enough on the hierarchy that it would be okay. But this guy, they were in theater together, and he was just like such a good actor. He was really funny. He made everybody laugh, so like everyone loved him. And he quickly got like this little group of friends. Oh yeah, overnight Patty developed a clique. There was Ashton, there was Dylan, there was Trish. Oh, okay. And then it said Miss Gonzalez. He was a daughter of the Spanish teacher. I was like, Miss Gonzalez in his clique. Then there was Trey. So Ashton, Dylan, Trish, and Trey. And JP would like go and sit near them at lunch and like try to like join their clique. Because yeah, he thought just being near him, the exposure would like rub off on him, and it kind of did. And he thought he felt like he had permission to like be more like Patty. He thought like people would be okay with it. And then one day he said for his 14th birthday he wanted a Tar Heels shirt with like the light blue logo. And he wore it a few times, and then one day like he walked up to the clique and they were like, did you get that shirt because you like Patty? Do you have a crush on him? Are you gay? And they started like tormenting him. I don't want to, oh, I should mention this is one of the chapters where there's a suicidal ideation almost attempt. So if you don't want to listen to that, skip ahead. Yeah. So I should have mentioned that sooner. Anyway, so yeah, Patty was a really good actor, and like all of his friends were tormenting JP. Some of the teachers would see it and like they didn't really do anything, you know. And then there was this big like theater production. There was like a series of comedy skits for the drama class. And JP was in it. He was like, he had one line. But Patty was in like all the skits. And so he says, the following Monday, back in homeroom, Miss Price pulled a small cardboard box out from under her desk. I want to congratulate everyone who participated in the play on Friday. I decided to get your autographs now before you get famous, she said. She shuffled around with her box full of thin paper strips, dutifully placing one on the desk of every thespian in the room who'd been in the class production. She arrived at me and set my little slip on my desk. I couldn't help but feel I was being mocked. A wise guy, eh? How did she remember that I'd been in the play at all? I would have preferred she'd skip me. Then she arrived at Patty's desk. He was staring out into space, as was his custom in class, chin resting on his knuckles, baseball cap sitting askew on his head. Miss Price stopped in front of him, took a good long look as if on the verge of saying something stern and punishing. She raised the cardboard box over her head and dumped its contents down over him, sending a flurry of white slips of paper fluttering to earth. Some of the students in class started clapping. Well, I thought, time to kill myself. It wasn't so much that I wanted the praise Patty was getting, though of course it would have been nice. It was more that in that moment, everything became clear as a crystal bullet to me. Patty could call me an F slur every day. He could make my life a living hell, and everyone could see it and know about it, and people would still love him because I didn't matter. Those slips of paper were a prophecy. He was going to be famous. He was going to be a rich and successful comedian or an actor or something, and Miss Price would frame one of his autographs and put it up in her room and tell people about it years later. And what about me? What would happen to me? So that was, I think Chiron in the 8th and Pluto in the 12th house both kind of like seem like suicidal ideation to me. Pluto is about like transformation, but it's like usually trauma that leads to transformation because you don't want to change if everything's good, right? So like you have to go through some challenging stuff before, you know, like the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of changing. So yeah, Pluto in the 12th house. The 12th house is another house that's aspected to the ascendant. So it often represents like self-sabotage or other hidden enemies. Yeah. So like killing yourself would probably make yourself an enemy, you know? So yeah, he said his parents had a pistol under their bed and he went home. They asked if he wanted Pizza Hut and he said no. But they left and he went under the bed and retrieved the gun. He said it was heavier than he expected and he walked up to the mirror and put it to his head just to see what it looked like, to see if it was silly looking and melodramatic. And he said it was. I was like the fake mobster drowning in an adult costume several sizes too big for me, holding the ridiculous prop. So I hope you can tell his one line was he was a mobster. He went, "Oh, wise guy, eh?" That was it. And he said he didn't know how to load it or if there were bullets in it. He didn't know anything. Wrong, wrong, always wrong. I cried over all the things I couldn't do and slid the gun back into place. So he didn't really like attempt anything, but it was like definitely like suicidal ideation. Anyway, then there was a day at their high school or their middle school called May Day or Field Day in May. In May there's a day called Field Day. And like the 8th graders would get to go like skip half of the day of school and hang out on the field, on the soccer field, eat pizza and sign yearbooks. So that's just like a little fun thing that they get to do. Someone kicked a soccer ball at him and it hit his thigh like near his groin, but just narrowly missing. So it like, he didn't like immediately flinch when it hit him. But it probably looked like it hit him in the dick, and then someone was like, he doesn't even have a dick, he's a girl. And then so he just like, it's like whatever, and he started to leave, and then Patty and his posse or his clique started following him, and they were like threatening him. They're saying like they were gonna fight him, but they were like backing up still because JP's a pretty like big kid. And then someone starts holding Patty back, and then he starts going, "Let me go, I'm gonna kill him, I'm gonna kill this F-slur," which he wasn't talking like that before being held back. And he's, meow, what's up, buddy? Okay. And he said, all along, all that talk and none of it had been real. So he realized he could have fought back at any point, and that made it worse because he was just tolerating all this like torment, this abuse from these kids for no reason. And then so he went back inside in the school. He said he was banging on his head on a locker. His vision blacked out, and he was saying over and over again that he wanted to die. And then he got like called into the principal's office, and yeah, they were like, "Do you want to kill yourself?" And he said yes. And so the principal called his mom. Yeah, so the principal calls his mom and says he had a rough day, and then so his mom, when they get home, she was in tears and she said suicide. And he said yes, and she said why? He said I don't know, and she said are you gay? And he said no. And then yeah, they go out to eat, and he like accidentally hits a car. He opens the door and the wind blows, and he like accidentally hits the car next to him with his door, and then the person who owns that car like freaks out. Is like, "What are you doing? How dare you?" And then his mom like stands up for him. I don't think he has a void of course moon. But yeah, she's like, "It was an accident. You don't know what kind of day he's had, and yeah, you leave him alone. You understand me?" So she protects him, and she's a teacher at another school, so they pretty much decide like he's gonna go to that school instead, because everyone knows at this school that he wants to kill himself, and they're tormenting him for being gay. And he hasn't even accepted or like, yeah, accepted that he's gay yet, and so it's like he kind of feels like it shouldn't be happening. And then yeah, he talks about back as an adult visiting the high school. He's looking back at the mosaic and he doesn't see it anymore. And he's basically like, the conclusion is that we make our own stories. We like, life is a story we tell ourselves, kind of. That's my phrasing, not his. I don't know what my cat wants. So yeah, so we have these like events that happen in our lives, but we get to decide like what picture, the overall story that we tell ourselves about it is. So that's the end of that chapter. So okay, hopefully people will be rejoining us here. This chapter is called How to Kiss Your Girlfriend. The question, how do I make peace with the years I lost in the closet? So he starts a relationship online. He meets a girl on MySpace. He says she has a widget on her page that allowed anonymous commenters to share their thoughts because tweens are nothing if not self-destructive. Someone commented, "You're an ugly slut." And he said, "I don't think you're ugly, you're very pretty." And he said he did think she was really pretty. What's up, little buddy? You want to see Paul? He just keeps meowing and I don't know what to do about it. So yeah, so they meet on MySpace. He says, "I liked the way she dressed. Scrolling through her pictures, I noticed that she would cycle through punk band shirts and preppy sweaters without fully committing to either aesthetic. I thought this was a bold sartorial vision." This again reminds me of having Gemini as the 7th house, because Gemini is like the twins back and forth, double-bodied, and she's like punk and preppy, but like that's one of the things that he liked about her. So yeah, so they start messaging on MySpace. They write letters that they promise they'll exchange when they meet in person. They start talking on the phone, and things get more serious, and then they meet one day at the mall. He thinks she's gonna be disappointed when she sees him, but he says like her whole body relaxed when she saw me, so like she really likes him. She's like excited talking to him on the phone for hours, writing him letters. They exchange the letters. When they meet, they end up going to the movies, and they kiss. They kiss through the whole film. Okay, so they go see Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and she says she hasn't read the books. She's been waiting to see. I've been waiting forever just to get the rest of the story since the last movie. Isn't that dumb? Why don't I just read the books? And he said yeah, and leaned over and kissed her, which, like, I feel like if I was on a date and I was like, I can't wait to find out what happens in this movie, and then the guy just, like, kissed me the whole time, I'd be like, did you not hear me say I wanted to know what happened in the movie? But yeah, they kiss the whole time, and she seems happy about it, which I was kind of like, okay, maybe you should have waited, but till the end, you know? But anyway, so she could get the plot. But anyway, who cares? So then he says, both Rebecca and I figured we would need to have sex sooner rather than later, now that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. Because where I'm from, Wasted, it wasn't entirely common to be married before you could legally drink. My own parents had met as sophomores in high school. Classmates would occasionally get pregnant, causing a minor scandal, but it was all part of the cultural paradox we were so accustomed to. Sex outside of marriage was bad and sinful, but if you hadn't had sex yet by 16, well, what's the holdup, fella? You gay or something? And then in parentheses it says, probably. So he doesn't want people to think he's gay, and he thinks that him and Rebecca are gonna need to have sex. They go to another movie, a Nick Cage movie, that absolutely no one wanted to see because they wanted to be alone in the theater. And she shows up wearing a halter top, and she seems nervous. She says, hey, excited for Nick Cage? It was perhaps the least sexually stimulating sentence I'd ever heard. He says, yes, totally, let's do it. I mean, yeah, let's go. They didn't have sex, they basically just fooled around. But while that was happening, he realized he couldn't do this. He says, I could try and try and try, and all I would ever be able to do was try while never quite getting there. And was that any way to live? Was that really fair to Rebecca? So they, like, kind of start getting more distant. He says, a gulf widened between us, a gulf that was wide enough for James to enter the picture. So one day he gets a text from his friend saying, are you and Rebecca still together? And he says, yeah, why? And he gets a picture of her and James holding hands at the mall, and yeah, so they end up breaking up. So yeah, but everyone thinks he's straight now because he had a girlfriend, so that's good. And then yeah, basically a lot of the chapters have, like, a lot of philosophizing at the end because he's a Sagittarius rising. Not all of them, but this one does. And the part that I noted down was, okay, what if coming out of the closet didn't herald the beginning of an entirely new life, an event that partitioned my life into BC and AD? What if, Wasted, I'm still not so different from that kid who was chasing after someone, anyone who would validate his place in the world and make him feel less alone? What if I'm still navigating taboos and social expectations and making missteps along the way? That was another Chiron in the 8th house kind of thing, the navigating taboos and social expectations. And he says, I think I prefer that way of looking at it because I find myself wanting to keep the time I spent with Rebecca. I don't want to see our relationship as a failed experiment or a sad attempt at hiding who I really was. I want to include that time, the good and the bad, in the project of my life. Again, like, our life is a series of things that happen, but we get to tell ourselves the story of what it means. Very Piscean, I think. But Pisces and Sagittarius are both ruled by Jupiter, so his ascendant and his sun are both very Jupiterian, you know? They're kind of similar. I'm not willing to see any part of my past or Rebecca as disposable, as I think a lot of gay men do with prolific concepts like gold star gay, a man who's never had sex with a woman, and performative disgust for vaginas, which he says earlier in the book. In, like, a sex ed class, he had a presentation where he said vaginas in front of everyone, so then he puts in parentheses vaginas. I think we sometimes reduce women, diminish women, cast women and their bodies as jokes or as failed attempts on our sexual liberty because we think that's That's a small revenge on the straightness that was unjustly imposed upon us. I find that impulse somewhat understandable, but its manifestations lazy at best. So I just like that part, because I'm like, yeah, some gay men, I don't want to say all gay men, some gay men do kind of like use their gayness as an excuse to be misogynistic. But anyway, the next chapter is called How to Be a Real Mexican. The question is, Hola Papi, how do I overcome my imposter syndrome to live my life as an authentic Latino? Signed, Panicked Hispanic. So yeah, he feels like he's not Mexican enough. He's half Mexican. He says his grandma was Mexican and their kids are Mexican, but he wanted like all of her kids married white people, because she wanted them, like her grandkids, to have a better life than she did. So his mom's Mexican, his dad is white. He got a job at Rosa's tortilla factory because he felt he wasn't Mexican enough, not because, as he claimed, he needed the money or because he had to put the experience on his college applications. It was because he thought he was a big fraud. His grandma makes fun of him when he's leaving the house in his uniform. He was deliberately undermining all the hard work Abuela had put into making me white. And there's something him and his grandma were watching on the news, and then she said like, oh, this is like bad for us. Oh, they sure do hate us, huh? And he didn't feel like he was a part of the us, or that was the first time he felt like he was included in that. But he didn't feel like it was his pain to really carry. So yeah, even though he did get like racially teased, like racist comments at his school. They used to call him Beaner, but then he told them he was actually half German, and so they started calling him Beaner Schnitzel instead. So he was like definitely like experiencing racism, but he still felt like it wasn't enough. He's not Mexican enough because he doesn't speak Spanish. So at this job, he has his coworkers. They help him learn Spanish, they say, and he helps them learn English. He says they told him, we'll talk shit about you to your face, and when you get mad, we'll know you learned Spanish. And then so communication and like language is very third house. He has Aquarius in the third house, ruled by Saturn. And so like Saturn is the furthest planet from the sun. It's like the visible planet anyway. The furthest planet they knew about in traditional astrology, so it represents limits. It's like the limit of the solar system, or the limit of like the visible planets anyway. Yeah, Saturn delays, but it doesn't deny. So like the fact that he's like his grandma didn't teach him Spanish growing up, but he eventually learns it. So yeah, his communication does like eventually come through because it's delayed, not denied. And he also has Mercury there too. So Mercury is another planet, or the planet that rules communication. So like when Mercury is retrograde, everyone talks about, oh, communication's gonna go crazy. And he says like when his coworkers teach him Spanish, he helps them learn English too, but all they want to know are words like specifically they wanted to know how to say dick in as many different ways as possible. And then he just lists a bunch of words for dick. So that's fun. And then before he leaves the job, somebody makes another racist comment. They're like, he's working on his college applications, and they're like, shouldn't you be working in construction? And he doesn't really get upset about it, but the other guy, like there's a guy there who works there who has 2 daughters, and he gets really upset about it. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense because this is like his life, you know? And then the other thing, his final exam for Spanish is helping one of the customers. She's like very angry. They gave her the wrong tacos, and they're like, go help her, only Spanish. And so he it sounds like he's cursing out his entire family line, and then, but he manages to pick out the, like, he doesn't understand a lot of it, but she wanted chicken tacos and they gave her beef. So he says, boy, make tacos nuevos, and they give her the new tacos, and he tries to tell her that they're like on the house, they're free, but I think what he says is like tacos libros, which means more like freedom tacos than tacos that are free of charge. So they're like making fun of him in the back. And the other last thing that they have him do is take out the hot grease to the dumpster. So he's walking it with Javier, one of the cooks, and he's like kind of distracted, and he trips, and like the oil, the hot grease splashes a little bit, and it gets on Javier's arm, and he's like, oh, lo siento, lo siento, lo siento, lo siento, and he says, that's all I could say. But then Javier shows him he has like a bunch of scars and burns from that, so they're sitting there having a cigarette, and then Javier's like, you know what you are, and he says a prick, because when he was teaching him the words for dick, one of them is prick, and he said he didn't like turn off his Spanish brain, I guess, before saying it, so he rolled his R for it. So okay, I didn't even talk about, I did a little bit, the astrology of Saturn. So Saturn's his worst planet, so like them talking shit to his face so that he can learn Spanish is kind of funny. I was talking about his grandma, which is his mom's mom. So 10th house, the 10th from the 10th house, derivative houses. So if you have like your mom is the 10th house, your mom's mom is the 10th house from the 10th house, which would be the 7th house. So that'd be the Mars and Gemini. And like Mars severs, so like, and then Mars is ruled by the Mercury conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. They're not like conjunct degree based, but they're in the same sign, so sign based conjunction. So Mars severs, so he's like, his grandma was the one who kind of severed his like Spanish from him because she wanted them to like be more white. And then the other thing I said, so he's getting a job, which is like 10th house is career, but I feel like jobs are more of a 6th house thing. Like if you're working for like a wage, it's like 6th house. And he said, he has, Taurus is the 6th house ruled by his exalted Venus, and his job is making tortillas, and he says tortillas would file down the conveyor belt, warm, fluffy white clouds gathering in a basket at the bottom. Sometimes I'd get into the rhythm of it and dissociate. I'd imagine myself as a worker in heaven on a construction line, pumping out dreams to pass the time. So that's very like Taurus, 6th house, ruled by exalted Venus, and Pisces. Just like, the heavenly clouds. And then, yeah, the talking shit to your face, Saturn and Mercury and Aquarius. That's pretty much all I had there. Okay. This chapter is called How to Come Out to Your Boyfriend in a Walmart Parking Lot. I feel like that title would have been funnier. I don't know why he took out the boyfriend part. It's just how to come out in a Walmart parking lot. Yeah, anyway. Hola Papi, how do I let go of a rotten relationship? Signed, Addicted to You. So this is about a boy named Corey, which he says at the beginning that all the names have been changed. And some people have been like amalgamated into one, like multiple experiences combined, you know? Like most memoirs, although I feel like Jeanette McCurdy, when I was reading hers, I was like, a lot of these names are just the same, you know? Like, I don't know all the boys that she dated, but like Miranda is still Miranda Cosgrove. She mentions Nathan. She does change the creator, so that's interesting, but yeah, most people change the names. Anyway, he says, there were 3 things I didn't want to admit about Corey and me, Addicted. First, I didn't want to admit that there might have been something gay about the two of us seizing on every opportunity to jerk each other off. Then he talks about that a little bit. The second thing I didn't want to admit about Corey and me was that I was in love with him. And the third and final thing I couldn't admit about Corey and me was that we desperately needed to part ways. So basically, then he goes back and talks about how he met Corey. Corey was in this cult youth group, which cult is the 8th house. And this is like one of his deep wounds, like the first boy that he's in love with like won't admit that he's gay, which is like so sad. Anyway, even though they're like literally like you said, jerking each other off all the time, like every chance they get. So he's in this youth group that everyone says seems like a cult. And he's like, Corey's trying to get him to convert to, or like join his youth group. And so he's like, I was just wondering what your relationship with Jesus is like. And Sean Paul says, he's ignoring my texts. Why? What has he told you? And then Corey's like, you don't have to be disrespectful, he says. And then JP says, well, you asked. And then Corey's like, man, he said, he seemed amused, like the game was officially afoot and I had proven to be an especially clever species of prey. Like he was a lion and I was a gazelle with a jetpack. So it's gonna be like that, huh? So this is another like Gemini 7th house thing. He's like this is the beginning of their friendship, relationship, situationship, some might say. Yeah, he's like turning his words on his head. Gemini is like ruled by Mercury. Mercury deals with like words, especially Gemini. Like Gemini is a very clever and like witty sign. And yeah, just very good at like turning people's words on their head and like good at witty banter and stuff. And then Corey says to leave him alone. Addicted, he did not leave me alone. He kept like coming and like trying to convert him, get him to join the cult. And then he says he was in a world religions class at the time, which I was like, oh my gosh, that's so many 9th house topics. Like 9th house is like worldly, like travel, long distance travel, religions, and higher education. So it's like world religions class is just like so 9th house 9th house chart ruler. Anyway, yeah, the teacher told him a parable about, he thinks it was Hindu, about an eagle holding a feather that would fly over a mountain once a year and brush its tip with a feather. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the eagle would at last reduce the mountain to nothing, bringing about the end of the world and the start of a new era. This reminded him of Corey. The idea of fending him from the mountaintop every day just seemed exhausting. So eventually he asked Corey, he's like, let's have lunch. We don't even have to talk about fuel. He didn't want to keep having to like fend him off. So, wait, no. Corey asked him if he said, let's have lunch. We don't even have to talk about fuel. And then John Paul says he shouldn't have agreed, hindsight being 2020, but he did. And Corey has a car. So, which like, again, Saturn in the 3rd house. Cars are very 3rd house to me. Obviously, Vedic Valens doesn't talk about cars in the 2nd century, but it's like, you know, short distance travel, like daily things. So Saturn in the 3rd house, he doesn't have a car. Corey does, and he thinks that's cool. So they drive to a duck pond and they're eating hot dogs, and it's like just 2 guys eating hot dogs. It's very phallic, and they're alone, and it feels a lot like a date. So then they're like, okay, maybe we should talk about religion. And JP says, shit, let's get it over with. And Corey says, can you not cuss in front of me, please? And JP says, why? And he says, because I don't like obscenity. And JP says, I'll stop if you can spell obscenity. And Corey says, no. But then he says, fine, I won't cuss. And then Corey's asking, like, do you have any questions? He's like, everyone has questions. Even I have questions. And JP's like, wow, even you? You know, like in mock admiration. And Corey's like, that's not what I mean. And so eventually, I'll skip over a little bit, but he does ask him his questions. He's like, why is there like war? You know, like why do bad things happen? And what about people who were born into other religions? Do you think that they're all going to hell? And then he says, to make a long story short, addicted, I accidentally killed Corey's god in the duck pond parking lot over the course of several lunches. So he's asking Corey these questions, and then Corey goes to fuel and then asks them, I guess. And then he starts realizing there's like some contradictions. Like Corey tells him one day, I asked how you could be pro-life and pro-war at the same time. And so like the further he gets away from God, the more swearing he starts to do. So he's like how are you gonna be against abortion but then kill a shit ton of people? You know what I mean? It don't make no sense, dude. So yeah, Corey's like losing his religion and starting to swear more. And they start hanging out more now that Corey's not trying to get him into a cult. They like go to each other's houses and play video games. And yeah. There's one day in the middle of summer, Corey and his family are going on vacation. He's gonna be gone for a week, and so this is the first time that he's gone a week without seeing Corey. And he's like upset. He's like thinking about him all the time. He said Corey posted one picture on Facebook and John looked at it every day. He was wondering like, is Corey thinking about me too? Stuff like that. And he says, I had no vocabulary for being in love with another man, addicted. I had never let myself learn it for fear that I would have to use it one day. So again is like Mars and Gemini in the 7th house, ruled by Mercury in the 3rd, conjunct Saturn. Like, he's the one severing himself, which Mars also rules the 12th house. He's like preventing himself from learning this language, Mercury, because he doesn't want to have to use it. And again, Saturn is like limiting. Oh, and Corey would talk about like girls that he liked, and JP would keep like putting them down. He said Gabby was too promiscuous, Sarah was too demanding, etc. And one day Corey said, I love you, man, when they were driving. It seemed to come off the top of his head. I thought he hadn't considered too hard before letting it out. And JP says, well, I enjoy you at times. And then Corey says, you're a jerk. And he rests his arm really close, and it's like they're almost holding hands. JP wonders if he's doing it on purpose. And he starts like analyzing all these little things that Corey does, wondering if like he likes him too. One day they're at Corey's house and they're gonna play Wii, and JP picks up the remote and he said it looked like a dog chewed on it, but there wasn't even a dog in the house. So like, what's going on there? I don't know, but he's like, I'm not using this. And Corey's like, so I'm supposed to use it? And he says, yeah, you are. And they start like wrestling over the Wii remote. And while they're wrestling, they both get hard. JP obviously feels himself get hard first, and he tries to like roll over. He's on his stomach, so Corey can't tell. And then Corey's on top of him, and he can feel that Corey's hard. And then he thinks about kissing him, but he doesn't. They just go back. He's like, okay, so should we play Wii now? And he said while they were wrestling, I asked myself for the first time if this is what I wanted, and if it was, could I let myself have it? So that's another like self-sabotage thing, like Mars ruling the 12th house in the 7th. He's like, this is what he wants, but he's like kind of self-sabotaging because he won't let himself want this. He won't let himself like have this. Eventually the two boys take a road trip. They're in Oklahoma and they go down to Texas. I think he says Austin. Yeah, Austin, Texas. They get to the hotel. They had booked a single like a room with one bed, and when they get there, the lady at the reception desk is like, oh, we just had an opening, there's like a room with 2 beds, wouldn't you prefer that? And he says yes, even though like he obviously wouldn't. But then he's like, why? Like nothing would happen anyway. So they go to sleep. He wakes up in the morning, he takes a shower, and when he comes out, Corey's on the bed and he's just like naked and stroking his erect penis, he says. I don't think he says penis, but he says stroking his erect dick, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so they fool around. Hold on. He says, touching him finally without the recoil of pretense, without having to call it anything else. I shuddered when he touched me back. I was terrified, but I wanted this so badly. His palms were hot on my skin, and although my eyes rolled back in pleasure, I maintained a steady fear that his hands would stop caressing and strike me instead. But the more I gave in to what was happening, the more a hypothetical future opened up, one in which we could touch each other without having to worry about being caught, about being walked in on, or having to dance around the subject. Would this happen again? And then again, I saw a dim, blurry but possible future with Corey. If I could just excavate the truth of his feelings, it would be ours. Anyway, addicted, we jerked each other off. So funny. I highly recommend, I said this a lot in the last video, I highly recommend, if you haven't read this book, buy it or check it out from your local library, because it's very funny. Some parts are very funny, some parts are very sad, but it's like, it's really good. I highly recommend it. Anyway, so when we finished, we didn't look at each other. We put our clothes on, performing the routine as if this happened all the time. We just had to climb back into the skins we had left, puddled on the ground, and forget. But then we went to dinner, returned, and did it again. We didn't see much of Austin at all. And then on the drive back to Oklahoma, he says Corey's demeanor becomes like more reserved. And they get back and Corey tells him, "I want you to disappear." He turned to me, more serious than I'd ever seen him, and said in a voice I hadn't heard in years, the voice he'd used to talk about God, fear, and reverence for something I couldn't see, "I want you to disappear." I met this with silence, something I'd never done with Corey before. I'd always had a rebuff. I always had a comeback. When we'd first met, it was sport to me, turning his words on their heads. Another like Gemini 7th house. I think he'd like that. And I think even back then, when I was still pretending to hate him, that I'd like that he liked it. I'd felt like I was performing a magic trick for him. In the long arc of our relationship, I'd always had words. And again, like Mars, not very much Mars in the 7th house, but like just Gemini 7th house, ruled by Mercury. He says, I felt like I was performing a magic trick for him. Mercury is associated with the Magician card in the tarot. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And then, yeah, he stops talking to Corey for a while. He says he goes off to college and like he tells everyone the like heterosexual sexless version of the story. Like he's hoping someone's gonna say he'll come back, but all they say is that sucks. But eventually he does come back. Corey texts him sup. And so they resume where they left off before Austin. JP says, I went back to obsessing over his every interaction with me, JP says, we resumed where we'd left off before Austin. I went back to obsessing over his every interaction with me, staring at the Rorschach plots of our relationship, looking for romance. I don't know what he saw when he looked at us. I only know he wanted to fool around and call it something else. So yeah, they would just keep wrestling, jerking each other off when they were alone. But like one day, Corey asks, have you ever put it inside a guy? JP doesn't answer, but later he asks, would you ever be with a guy? Thinking, would you ever be with me? And Corey says, I just want to be normal. So then eventually, this is kind of funny. So at the beginning, he says, he decides to come out to Corey in the Walmart parking lot, as he says. He says, I just dropped out my sophomore year in college and had only recently decided it was about time to come out of the closet. It wasn't an easy decision. I'm not sure I would have come out that year if I hadn't taken an Adderall to keep me awake from my biology final a few weeks prior, hyping me up so much that in a fit of gay mania, I started Facebook messaging everyone I knew, revealing that I was a homosexual. Responses ran the gamut from I support you to yeah, I figured to that's cool, man, but do I know you? Telling a dozen or so people helped me work up the courage to admit it to myself. And then eventually to Corey. So yeah, they go to the Walmart parking lot. He says, I'm gay. So there's that. He's hoping Corey's gonna say me too or same or something, but he doesn't. He says, that's cool, man. Like, you'll do good with that, you know? And JP's like, being gay? And Corey's like, yeah, like, you even convinced me to do stuff with you, which obviously that's not true. He was like suppressing himself. and his desires, and then Corey was like the one laying naked on the bed stroking his erect dick. So that's not what happened. And he says, we both knew I had done no such thing, but I immediately understood the purpose of what he'd said. I'd known him too long not to. He was asking for a favor. He was saying, take this all on yourself, please, so I can forget. I decided I would, not only because I still loved him, but also because it was at least and at last a final answer. So they stop talking. Corey drives him back to his house and drives away. So sad. Okay. The next chapter, how to fall in and out of love. The question is, Hola Papi, I think I lost the one. Help. Signed, Loveless Loser. So he says he's working at an Austin film festival, and he meets this guy Thomas on OkCupid. And there's like no reason that he should have messaged Thomas. His profile was sparse, his picture was vague. A man with tousled brown hair sitting on the back of a jet ski, wearing a white shirt with the buttons undone, sunglasses obscuring most of his face. He just said, hey there, and JP said, hey back. Like, hey back, as the message. So then they started talking on the phone. Let's see. This was funny to me. JP says, I was excited because I thought of myself as a person who was drawn to numbers people. Okay, let me just read the whole paragraph. So they're talking on the phone. He says, we covered all the bases. Thomas's dad was a cattle rancher just outside Houston, and he was in his final year as a math major at the University of Texas. I was excited because I thought of myself as a person who was drawn to numbers people. And as I was reading this, I was thinking like numbers people, that'd be like probably Virgo. Where's Virgo in his chart? 10th house opposite his sun. Okay. I was drawn to numbers people who were grounded in practical matters. That solidified the Virgo to me. Practical is a very Virgoan word. Okay, people who are grounded in practical matters and held in enviable competence. The opposite of people like me, anxious creatives. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's so Sun in Pisces, opposite Virgo. He doesn't have any Virgo placements, but it's still like, It was so funny when I was reading it. It was just like, Okay. So yeah, he's talking to, what's his name? Thomas. Yeah, I read the name Kelsey. He has a roommate named Kelsey who he tells all about his men that he's seeing. So he invites Kelsey over, under the condition that he has to wear cowboy boots. He's excited to see the cowboy boots. Kelsey shows up. He says, JP opens the door and says, nope, try again. And Thomas says, excuse me? And he says, those aren't cowboy boots. And then Thomas says, they're in my car. And then JP says, then come back later. And he's like, oh, come on, man. And JP says, I'm serious. And then so the doorbell rings again, and he opens the door wearing cowboy boots, and he's like, happy now. So they go inside, they drink a couple beers, they have sex. Thomas reveals that he'd just come out of the closet and that JP was his first, and JP's like kind of worried. He's like, oh, I'm just like the first of, now he's gonna go on and like be with all these other guys, and I'm just like gonna mean nothing to him. But like when Thomas leaves, he's still thinking about him a lot, and so he texts him and lets him know like, hey, I had a really good time and I can't wait to see you again. And then he freaks out. He's like, oh god, I can't stand this. And so he like he doesn't turn his phone off, but he like puts it on silent and refuses to look at it. And then I think he's at work and he just focuses on the work, and then when he's done, he still doesn't look at his phone and just throws it in the glove compartment of his car and goes to the grocery store. He's like just freaking out, just walking through the aisles like a zombie. And then he runs into like an ex fling of his named Dave. He's an older man. He's like richer, and he had a really nice place, and took so like they went to Dave's place, and he said like, I even bottomed for the first time just because he asked me to. This was all in the past, obviously, because he's still freaking out about Thomas. And so Dave's like, what are you doing or I think JP says, what are you doing here? And Dave's like, well, unfortunately, some of us have to eat. No, some of us have to eat, sad but true. What about you? And he's like, oh yeah, I'm just walking around, I guess. And then Dave invites him to go night swimming, which when I was first reading this, I'm like, oh no, he's gonna like have sex with Dave again, and like it's never gonna work with Thomas, but that's not what happens. They just go swimming. And then he tells Dave all about Thomas, and Dave is like, you gotta take the band-aid off. You gotta rip the band-aid off. That's the best way to do it, you know? Because if he doesn't like you, like, it's better to know sooner rather than later. Yeah, you shouldn't avoid things like that. It's always better to just bite the bullet. So they go back to JP's car, or they're both leaving, and JP goes back to his own car. And then his phone's dead. He pulls it out of the glove compartment to check if Thomas replied, and the phone's dead. So he rushes home to try to charge it, and then Thomas is there at his house when he pulls up, so he's like, well shit, Thomas said, here you are. Thomas, as it turned out, felt the same way I did, something I could have found out roughly 10 minutes after I told him so over text earlier that day. So like all of this freaking out was for nothing. So him and Thomas start hanging out all the time, like spending all their time together, going grocery shopping together and all this stuff. And then eventually JP has to go back to school. No, he's in Austin for his job. So he goes back to Oklahoma because the job's over. And I think, yeah, it's like a summer job. So he is going back to school. And so Thomas agrees to call him like the next day. He says, he calls me twice. You'll call me on the way home, he asked. Of course, I said. It was a dramatic farewell. Thomas called me twice on the way home, then he called me once the next week when I was back at my parents' house and waiting for school to start. He texted me a couple of times a week after that, and then he started ignoring the things I sent him. When he finally responded once in October, he told me simply, I'm talking to someone else. So JP's devastated. And then a year later, he returns to Austin, and his roommate wanted to go on a road trip, so he decides that he's gonna reach out to Thomas after a year and see if he wants to meet up, and he agrees to, and so they go to this bar together, and JP's really excited. He thinks that things might they might pick up where they left off. Things hadn't worked out with that guy, but he gets to the bar and he's limping in. And JP's like, are you all right? You're limping. And he's like, yeah, I got into a fight. And JP asks if he won, and he says no. He says things hadn't really worked out with the other guy, but that was fine. But he just wasn't really interested in seeing anyone. He hadn't told anyone else that he was gay since they'd last seen each other. He didn't feel like he needed to. And so he just seems really like bored, and like just the whole dinner, he's not really interested. And then like with food still on his plate, he says, I better get going soon. And JP says, yeah, same here, even though he's like devastated. He wants things to go further. And yeah, they're like on the way out, and JP like walks, Thomas is walking to his car, and JP walks the other way, even though he parked like the same direction, but he didn't want to like be with him anymore. So he goes into this like antique shop nearby and starts crying. And then yeah, he like philosophizes a little bit about memory. What if, loveless, memory is an act of creation? Our brains don't hold perfect records of the things that have happened. A Rolodex we can cycle through and call upon for official accounts. Maybe remembering is the same thing as imagining. Maybe I had imagined Thomas, imagined a man who loved me so that I could love myself, imagined a story wherein a handsome stranger had fallen into my lap one summer and made life worthier of living. But then no, not quite, not perfectly quite. There had been something real about Thomas, about the whole thing. It hadn't been exactly as I remembered, but that didn't negate everything I felt, everything I knew to be true. My question then, now that it was over, was, could it be enough? And he says, yes, I think so. I think it is enough. Love is nothing without fiction. It's a story like any story. It can be told well or told poorly. Eventually he says, I was in love once. I was happy to be in love. It was sad for a while when I wasn't. I'm glad it happened and that it's over. I do hope it happens again. That's nice. That's a nice little way to end it. And yeah, that's a good, like, I think he's saying, like, there's no such thing as the one. I'm not sure that person exists at all. I think there are simply important people in our lives. They don't always stay important. They don't always stick around. But the point at which we meet them, the point on the grid where our lives intersect, is a sacred thing. So yeah, just because someone isn't in your life forever, just because you don't like get married and spend every second together for the rest of your lives, doesn't mean that it was bad or that it didn't matter or that you're unworthy of love because they moved on. It all matters. Okay. The next chapter is how to chat with your childhood bully over a gay dating app. So, yeah, JP's back in Cash, and he's on this app or this website called Scruff, chatting up bearded dudes from Brazil, in broken Portuguese, he says. Because in Grindr, or on Grindr, there's like nobody anywhere near him. So, yeah, he went home for Thanksgiving, and he gets a message from somebody on, it's still on Scruff, I guess. And it just says, hey, and he would usually ignore, it's just a faceless account, and he would ignore it, but this one was only 2 miles away, so he's kind of curious, because he's like, who in this town is gay? And then he says, what's up? And then the guy says, I think you know me. He's like, what? So he gets his hopes up. He thinks it might be a former football player from high school that he says there was like some sexual tension between them. The guy says, we went to middle school together. So it's not the high school football player, because he transferred, right? And then JP asks, were we friends? And the guy says, you might not like me. I was a little mean to you. Ha ha. JP says, my middle school experience was no matter for ha-haing unapologetic. With terror bubbling up in my gut, I wondered which one he had been. I was pacing in circles around the house. Who, I finally gathered the courage to ask. Did I read this? I don't think so. Hola Papi, how do I forgive and forget? Signed, unapologetic. So, okay. When he says unapologetic, that's to the reader. Anyway, so he sent him a picture, and it was Dylan, one of his bullies. And Dylan, okay, I didn't read this earlier, 'cause, it was like, just seemed unnecessary. He says Dylan was the one who would slap him across the face with a hot dog and say, do you like wieners? F-slurs like wieners, right? And he'd put his arm around me and walk me to and from the cafeteria many times, whispering in my ear, ew, do you like this? Which, like, that's, oh my gosh, so uncomfortable just reading it. Okay, that was Dylan. The way he'd used touch against me had been so specific and effective, always asking me if I liked it. He had gradually planted the thought in my head, isn't it wrong to like this? That fear, that doubt perhaps, that contributed to how long I'd stayed in the closet, and yet all that time had Dylan been there with me. So he's on this, like, I don't know, he's going back and forth between, which is very like he has the sun in Pisces and Sagittarius rising, which are double-bodied signs, and then Gemini on the 7th house, so like all of those are double-bodied, which are like two, you know, so like one thing I think Austin Coppock said about Pisces is like you can listen to somebody talk and say like, oh, that's true of their experience, and then you can listen to someone else say the opposite thing, be like, okay, that's true too, like, so two things can be true at once. So he's kind of going back and forth. He says, Dylan asks, are you mad at me? And he's like wondering, like, I paced around the house, recalling of all things a tree outside my old apartment in Oklahoma City. It was warped like a big fish hook. The tree had grown up and around an object, perhaps a boulder, instead of straight up. The object, whatever it was later removed, resulting in the tree's strange trajectory. That was me, a weird-ass tree that had grown up around and in spite of Cash, in spite of Dylan, bending myself around these obstacles even after they'd long disappeared. And then so that reminded me of like Pluto in the 12th house, like kind of like growing in Scorpio. I don't know why, but like growing around something, and then but like still like where the Pluto part, but like yeah, growing around an object but still, I don't know what like I'm trying to say. Anyway, let's move on. So he asks again. Oh, JP asks, do you remember what you did? When Dylan asks, are you mad? He says, no, LOL, but I was a real asshole back then. JP says, I thought that was putting it rather mildly. He asks again, are you mad? And so JP's like walking around in Cash. He goes outside and walks down the road. He's like just contemplating, like, yeah, he's saying like, okay, here's the dilemma. Maybe forgiving this adult person who was and wasn't my former bully was possible. We'd both grown and changed. The more distance I had from my youth, the easier it was for me to see the person I'd been in middle school. I'd been antisocial, rude even and had coped by building a superiority complex, pretending I was hated because I was smarter and better than everyone else. Surely I'd hurt people too. Surely I was big enough now to make peace with this person from my past. On the other hand, was this not a classic line of thinking for a victim of abuse? Being too magnanimous in the face of my own misery? I had a nasty habit of letting people run all over me. I'd seen it in action. At work, I'd been promised a raise 2 times already, and both times the promises had been broken despite my numbers being better than everyone else's. I'd always moved on from these disappointments without complaint. I tended to shrink myself, afraid of the consequences of causing too much of a fuss. My experience with abuse had informed this practice, made everyone out to be a bully in waiting, and it behooved me to avoid bringing that out in people, lest I become my middle school self again, helpless and pathetic. What if, unapologetic, my urge to forgive Dylan came from that place? What if it stemmed from my desire to avoid conflict, to make things as convenient as possible for others at my own expense? As another, like Pluto in the 12th house, the self-sabotage part, like, yeah, making things as convenient as possible for others at his own expense. Self-sabotaging, but from a place of trauma. And then, so he's like walking around just wondering, he says violence is a circle that uses violence to perpetuate itself, leaving in its wake people who are both victims and villains in return. So like hurt people, but then I always like that is true. Like I think that people who are like abused as children, like people who abuse people as adults were probably abused as children, but that doesn't mean everyone who's abused as a child goes on to abuse people. Like some people will go through like difficult childhoods and then use that as like motivation to like never do that to someone else, you know? So it's like hurt people, yes, but like not every hurt person goes on to hurt people. So it's not that simple, you know? And then Dylan asks, do you want to fool around? And he's like, oh God, I thought as a new wave of horrific images flooded my vision, it would take me weeks, perhaps months, to scrub the nightmare of heading to Dylan's ranch and hooking up with him. It was the splash of cold water I needed. No, I said, have a good life, man. And you know what, unapologetic? I meant it. Okay, it's a little change of tone here. This is called How to Describe a Dick. Hola Papi, how do you keep chasing your dreams even though you're most definitely a failure? Signed, Screw Up. So he moves to New York for a writing job, and then he's fired after 2 weeks because he's not passionate enough. And then he takes a job. There's a guy named Alex who we met on Facebook, and after learning I was gay, he offered me a job recapping gay porn for a small family of cheap-looking blogs with neon logos and ads for fiber supplements all over the place. So basically he would get like 3 porn videos and he'd need to like summarize them and then find segments like that were gifable where like there was no nudity, but you could see like the pleasure on the guy's face and see like you could tell how much the thrusting was happening, but like you couldn't actually see anything. So he's he's like having trouble with this one video He doesn't know how to describe the dick as the titular dick of this title, of this chapter. Okay. He's basically just saying, like, I'd already used all these other descriptors in my previous posts. He says girthy, fat, rock hard. Why hadn't I saved any of those for this post? How like me to burn through everything too quickly without any consideration for the future. That was like the first like Aries moon to me thing that he says. Because Aries is a fire sign, like Aries of the fire signs is more of like just the initial spark, where Leo is more of like a hearth fire that like it stays, and then like it stays lit, you know, and lights up everyone in the hearth in the house. And then Sagittarius is more like a wildfire, I guess, where it's like always moving. But Aries is like the initial spark, and then it kind of like dies out really quickly. So he's like burning through everything too quickly without consideration for the future. So yeah, he's like stuck on this one. He's like frozen. He paused the video on this dick. He's trying to figure out how to describe it. And he like asked his roommate, like, hey, what are some words you would use to describe a dick? And the roommate says, want a mimosa? He called back, either not hearing my request or ignoring it, for which I was grateful. So he has a mimosa. And this is a freelance job. So there's a little bit that I want to read here that's more generational, I think. Okay, so a pervasive narrative about millennials, one millennials themselves like to propagate, is that we're teed up for failure because we're told too often that we're special. We're placed in special programs with names like Talented and Gifted, TAG, or Advanced Placement, AP, that were held in special rooms and carried special perks, and along the way we were deluded into believing that we must really be something to write home about. Then the reality of late capitalism stepped in, be it the form of student loans or a bleak job market, and our lack of fortune was compounded by a profound twist of the knife. But I'm special. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. I think there can be something to that idea while still believing it's for people whose schools had smart boards and, I don't know, textbooks. Lawton High had disabused me of any illusions that life was fair. The stabbings and metal detectors and general paper shortage taught me that life was a lottery. Being in AP classes in Lawton High just meant you had more money than other people, which was true in my case. But I did have an inkling, chalk it up to regular old hubris, that I was better in some way. Not better than other people, but better than what I was given. The notion that so many in my generation think this way because we were coddled or given too many participation trophies seems off. I think it's more about the idea of indignity, or more specifically, the idea that our inherent dignity has been denied, molested. We want to do worthwhile work that satisfies us, or at the very least adequately compensates us. We want to feel present in our labor. We want our labor to mean something. This to me felt like very like the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, where Capricorn is like the systems. I think of like Capricorns as like businesses, like and also freeways, like the CEO, you know, and like the structure that comes from businesses. And so like the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn is like a sudden change. Like everyone in this, I mean, people have been saying this for a long time, that nobody wants to work anymore. There's like, I've seen screenshots of like, or like photo sets, I guess, of just headlines that say that from like centuries back or like decades back. Anyway, but yeah, like a sudden change of like the way that the systems work. Like millennials like just don't want to keep working for someone else with like no, like we're not getting anything in return for it, you know? Anyway, so then he says, industry understands this desire and uses it to its advantage, luring young people into content mills and chic startups with promises of creating not just a product, but a culture of, or giving space to tell important and overlooked stories. There is something violating about doing work for people you can't see, people who expect you to be a genuine believer in things they don't even believe themselves, that you're going to change the world by selling a trendy piece of luggage, that you're going to build a loving community by launching a website that caters to runners, that you're going to uplift minority voices by writing a blog. These are the things you, the worker, must have at your core. These are the things you, the worker, the believer, must have at your core, must carry with you into the office every morning, must strive to embody in every professional interaction you have while employed there. Also, some guy who forgot he owned your company in the first place can decide to fire all of you while sitting on the toilet one day because he isn't raking in enough money or prestige or whatever it is he felt he wanted when he threw his fortune at it. That was very Pluto in Scorpio to me, especially. This is like, you're supposed to believe that you're, like, giving space to important and overlooked stories. Like, Pluto is about, digging things up from the surface and bringing them to light. And, like, yeah, the plutocracy that we currently live in, where, like, there's just, like, one guy who can, like, one rich guy can just decide to fire everyone at a place. And, like, yeah, uplifting minority voices, again, the Pluto thing. So, yeah, those are the generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And there's a very, like, it's talking about our generation. So I just thought that was very poignant. Okay. And then, okay, back to describing the dick. So he asks his roommate, and the roommate doesn't answer and just gives him mimosas instead. And yeah, he's like feeling a lot of regret. He's having trouble like paying his rent. He wants more work, and he's like sad about not having like health insurance and stuff. And just thinking like, nobody's gonna think he's a good writer. People are gonna think like he went into the smut field because he thought it was easier, but he can't even do that because he can't even describe this dick. His roommate offered him a mimosa earlier, and then now he says, "Do you want another one?" My roommate called from his bedroom. He'd been taking a nap. "No," I said, "I'm all right, thank you though." And then it hit me, the word I'd overlooked because I hadn't thought it flashy enough. "Thick," I screamed back from my room. My roommate groaned as if rolling back over in his bed to fall asleep again. It was only a mildly adequate word as far as descriptions of dicks go, screw up, but it would do for now. So, okay, that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called How to Dress Yourself in Silks and Linens. The question is, Hola Papi, I want to dress gayer, but I'm afraid. What do I do? Signed, Boring Closeted. And closeted is like parentheses over the ED. So, okay. Get it? Closeted? Okay. So he says his mom used to take him shopping with her, and he really loved shopping. He liked when she would like try on clothes and he would get to judge her outfits and stuff. But he felt like he couldn't, he wasn't allowed to like these trips because he's a boy. He said, "I could look at the treasures before me, but I couldn't partake. In fact, I was meant to pretend I hated the whole idea of clothing and accessorizing. That was girl stuff." So this to me is the exalted Venus in Pisces. Like Venus is our sense of beauty and fashion and stuff. And then his Venus is in the 4th house. The 4th house is like one of the more private houses. And it's a 10-degree, it's 9 degrees away from the IC, the opposite point to the midheaven. So it's like the lowest point in the chart, the most private. And Venus is the closest planet to that, even though the moon's in the same sign. But anyway, yeah, so exalted Venus, he loves the fashion and stuff, but he doesn't like feel like he can express it. He feels like he needs to keep it private. So yeah, which like, he says here that like nobody told him that he wasn't allowed to dress the way he wanted, but when I was reading that I was thinking about like yeah, he says, "Who exactly had been stopping me? In truth, no one had ever explicitly told me not to wear the things I'd wanted to wear. My parents overall were accepting people. Hell, looking back, my mother had all but deliberately raised a gay son." But I was thinking of the scene in his middle school where like he wore that Tar Heels shirt and everyone started making fun of him. So I'm like, I can definitely see why he would like not want to dress that way. So he would wear things that made him look like he didn't care about fashion, like sports jerseys or just like random things that were he said he had to shop at the Walmart like husky kids section a lot, and so that would leave him with clothes with like weird sayings on them. And then at some point he met some like gay people in New York who helped him learn about fashion, and they told him to watch RuPaul's Drag Race, and they took him shopping and stuff. And he learned that fashion can be a way of expressing yourself, and it was like a language, not with words, but you could say things like, I'm Helen of Troy, or where is it? I'm giving the judges Helen of Troy if she were a lesbian mall goth. That was something one could communicate if one wanted to with a curated selection of garments. It made me wonder if I had anything to say. So then when he moves to New York, he gets invited to this gay party. Holy Mountain, or Homo, is the name of the party, I guess. I didn't know parties had names. But he goes there, he wears like a leather harness with like a black mesh shirt under, and he gets there and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so underdressed, like I look like a straight person. Like everyone's just so like dressed elaborately in flashy clothes and a lot of makeup, and he feels like he needs to dress gayer. He goes shopping and he finds this like a witchy slip. He goes shopping and buys this witchy slip, but when he's wearing it, he thinks he's just a thick hairy man with a sweaty back in a witchy slip playing dress up. People would look at me and they would laugh, but he still bought it. I hoped that the daring act of buying it would change something in me, bring me closer to the kind of person who bought these sorts of clothes and then wore them. So he bought it, but he doesn't wear it for a while, and he says like the unworn shirt is like mocking him from the closet. But ultimately he decides that there's no uniform for being gay. There's no way of like looking gay, dressing gayer, or looking gayer. You don't have to dye your hair or paint your nails. It's more important to interrogate the gaze with which you behold yourself. It's more important to interrogate the gaze with which you behold yourself. Whose gaze is it, and what is it looking for? Boring? What might it be like to have a lens that is more your own? So it's more just about being yourself than like, you know, like queerness isn't about fitting into a mold of what it means to be queer. That's like kind of ridiculous. It's more about expressing yourself authentically, you know? He does say at the end, like expression, be it verbal or nonverbal, is how we articulate ourselves to the world. It can bring us into closer alignment with the complexity of our interiors, which are too great and too confusing to ever be brought entirely under the sovereignty of language. But in trying, it can help us make connections. At least thinking that way made me feel better about blowing over $100 on this beautiful linen top. It doesn't have a collar. Boring. Isn't that cool? It's like a robe I can wear outside. I discover new possibilities every day. So he doesn't explicitly say that he started wearing it outside, but he said he can wear it outside. It's a robe that you can wear outside. So I'm like, hopefully he's worn it outside. Okay, the next chapter, how to disagree with who you used to be. So this one there's a little bit of like sexual assault. Hi Wasabi. Yeah, if you don't want to see that, you should skip this. Hi. Okay. So he says one afternoon he was like just writing and he gets a message from this guy Carlos on Facebook, and he's like, should I answer? What do I do? All he says is, hey, how have you been? And then so he goes back and tells us who Carlos is. He says, tragedy brought Carlos and me together. I was a senior at the University of Oklahoma at the time. 2 years after a gay teen's suicide made national headlines, the city of Norman, and therefore the university had ramped up support for the local LGBT community in the form of resource groups and counseling. I found myself in one of these informal groups with Carlos because I was gay and suicidal, and my therapist had all but forced me. So one of the rules in this group is they're not allowed to like hang out outside of the group, which he's like fine with. He thinks like I don't really like all these people anyway. Some people still like send him friend requests and Grindr messages, but he shrugged them off. If anything, the group was a good excuse not to have to talk to them outside its sacred confines. But eventually Carlos does go up to him. Carlos isn't very like outspoken at these meetings. He's just kind of like vague. He says he has trouble sleeping or he finds it difficult to focus. But one day he walks up to JP and he sounds breathless, like he's been suppressing it until this very moment. He says, "Hey, would you like to get coffee with me?" And JP immediately says, "I didn't find Carlos very attractive, indecisive. He was like a bespectacled owl to me, like the Tootsie Pop owl, wearing a graduation cap. What I did like was the way he carried himself. He wasn't confident per se, but he was worldly. He seemed traveled, like he had seen things altogether more interesting than me. I found myself wanting to be, in his view, a sight." So that was very sad rising to me, like he's attracted to the like worldliness. Carlos he's a French literature major, or it says he's studying French literature. I don't know if that means he's a major. Anyway, so he lived in Marseille for 6 months. He's going to Lyon next. And the way he would pronounce French words was like syrupy and authentic, he says. And so JP thinks he's like kind of inadequate compared to Carlos. He has traveled a lot thanks to his parents, but he never lived abroad. And so he thinks that's like exciting. And yeah, so one day in the group session, they're talking about religion, and someone said that gay people hating on Christians was just as bad as Christians hating on gay people. I said those two things were nowhere near the same, and only one had any real power to drive someone to hating themselves or to closeting themselves. And then Carlos says, "I like what JP said." And JP found himself chasing these moments of validation from Carlos whenever he spoke, which was definitely not supposed to be the point of group therapy. So Valentine's Day came. Carlos texted him asking, "What are you gonna, or do you have any plans Thursday?" And JP said he's free, and Carlos said, "Oh, I didn't know it was Valentine's Day. I want to meet up, but there's no pressure if that makes it weird for you," which is like, we agreed to make dinner at his place. Was this a date? If so, I wish he'd just said so instead of hedging as he had. I may not have known what I wanted, indecisive, but I was pretty sure I didn't want someone who also didn't know what he wanted. I'm starting to think I didn't read this either. Okay. Hola Papi, something bad happened to me. Can I be mad about it like years later? Signed, indecisive. So, okay. Yeah, so they go out on Valentine's Day. They pick a recipe at random and they go grocery shopping. Some of the stuff it's hard to find, and Carlos keeps saying, "Oh, it's okay, we can just leave that out." And JP's like, "No, that's not how recipes work," but they just go with it anyway. They're making it, and he says the result was a goopy white mess that looked like it might gain sentience at any moment and let out a burp. And Carlos said, "It will taste good." And JP says that it did not. But they're drinking wine, and there's a moment where Carlos holds his wine glass in his two hands, laughing with a scrunched up face and flushed cheeks. There's a flicker of desire for him, suddenly, in what we might look like together. So there's just one moment. This is funny to me, like as a lesbian who has exclusively dated men, there's always just one moment where I would like look at them and be like, you know what, maybe it's not so bad, and then it's always bad. Anyway. And then, yeah, afterwards I would always be like, I never really liked him anyway. And then like another guy would like give me attention and I'd be like, you know what? Maybe he's not so bad. Maybe, yeah. Moving on. So yeah, they're at Carlos's place, and Carlos asks if he wants to lay down. He throws his arm over my chest as if he were asleep and just happened to roll over like that. Everything he did was so cautious, hedged, and felt more like a probe into seeing how I would react than a genuine move on its own. So JP doesn't want to be the one. He wants Carlos to just man up and make a move. He doesn't say that. Those are my words. But then eventually he's like going too slow. He's just moving his arm back and forth over his chest like a windshield wiper, so he sighs and pulls him on top of me. He quickly took off his glasses and plunged his face into mine. I'd been told some people were bad kissers, indecisive, but I don't think I'd actually really met any until Carlos, whose kisses were small and pecking and yet somehow too wet even though he wasn't using his tongue. So he's not attracted to him. Carlos is a bad kisser. And anyway, they like hook up. JP says, I didn't typically feel ashamed after hooking up, but this time felt desperately inappropriate, if for no other reason than I hadn't really felt like doing it, but had done it anyway. So then JP says something about like not knowing what his like next year was gonna be or where he was gonna live. And Carlos says, oh, my roommate's gonna be gone. This is like the first date, right? Like they got coffee the one time and then now they're like, yeah. Anyway, JP says, I mentioned something to Carlos about not wanting to go back to my family's house in cash for the summer, and he quickly offered that his roommate would be gone until next year. I could stay in his room and not have to pay anything. And he says, wow, are you sure? And Carlos says, oh, definitely, definitely, as if it was the most obvious thing, but failing to mask his eagerness. I will be so bored without someone else here. So JP moves in with Carlos. There's one day where he just gets really, really sick. And he says, I don't mean with a cold or something that kept me in bed for a couple days. The sickness came on like an apocalypse, brain splitting, blinding pain that lit up my body, followed by periods of sweaty numbness. I wailed and moaned and tossed and turned and cried. He didn't know what the sickness was, but Carlos came home. He was like, Jesus, what's going on? And he says, do you want a bath? I'll start you a bath, okay? So he makes him a bath. JP gets in the bath, and then Carlos also undresses and gets in the bath too. And JP like does not want this. I froze, not knowing how to react. I didn't know if I could react at all, being as weak as I was. He began washing me with a cloth. Come here. He began washing me with a cloth, his erection pressed to my back. He resented this. I resented the idea of touch lingering on me for the rest of my life. The touch I experienced in the tub was like that. His penis, so intrusive, so unwanted, so hated, left such a distinct physical sensation on me. It was like I knew all at once, even on the brink of passing out from my illness, how long this touch would stay on me, how difficult, if not entirely impossible, it would be to scrub out. And so I, exhausted by the idea, chose to ignore it because I hadn't asked for it. I didn't want it, and it had nothing to give me but anger. I told myself I would leave this in the water. Why are you walking on the paper? Ugh. Anyway, so the next day he texted his mom and sister. The next day my mom and sister came to pick me up. I sent my sister a desperate text saying I was extremely sick, and they decided to come collect me. So he stays in cash until he goes to Barcelona to study abroad the next year, so he stays in cash until then. And then Carlos calls him and says he's not going to France again. He wants to stay with you. He says, here, and he's JP's in Barcelona, so he's like, when you here, you can't stay with me here. And Carlos is like, no, sorry, I'm at Oklahoma. When you come back, I want to be together. And JP says, don't not go to France for me. You should go to France. And he says, I should. He sounded hurt. France is your whole thing, is it not? Well, yes, but you're worth it to me. You matter more than France. So he's like, yeah, JP does not like this guy, and he's gonna not go to France for him. But then, like, JP says he has a really bad time in Barcelona. He has a hard time making friends. He felt isolated, and he found himself like nostalgic for Carlos's house. So he comes back, and Carlos proposes the idea. I shouldn't say proposes, but it says Carlos relented, but he had a proposal. He had to go to Houston to get his visa from the French consulate in person, so why don't I come with him to meet his parents in Tulsa, hang out for a bit, and then do a road trip to Houston together. No pressure or anything, it would just be a fun thing. So he says no pressure, but obviously that's not true. So they go down to meet his parents. They're both doctors. And Carlos's sister is a doctor too. So yeah, JP gets along with his mom like really well. Like she asks him all these questions, like it's an important question, but try not to think about it too hard. Okay, here goes. Steinbeck, yes or no? And he says yes, not because he really cares about Steinbeck that much, but because he read The Grapes of Wrath in middle school, and so she's like, she approves of him. Carlos's mom offered us a shot of bourbon. I hated shots, but I took it because in my mind I could weasel my way into becoming her son if I kept choosing correctly. Steinbeck, bourbon, what's next? It was a matter of taking the right steps. And he's able to talk about like his writing with Carlos's parents, which he never really does with his own parents. So then they leave from Tulsa to Houston, just him and Carlos. They're staying in a hotel that's like attached to a mall. So they put their bags down and then they go to this gay bar called South Beach. And when they're there, Carlos is like trying to touch him, trying to kiss him, and JP pulls away. And then Carlos is like, okay, fuck this, and leaves. And JP's like, where are you going? And then Carlos says, you know, when you look at other guys, it makes me want to punch you. And JP says, punch me? And then he turned to the car, either you get in now or I'm leaving you here. So JP gets in, and Carlos is like, I should just fucking drive us off the overpass. Which, like, okay. Back to the looking at other guys thing. When I did have a boyfriend, this was so... It's funny to me now. It wasn't funny at the time. But I remember there was, like, one day we were at Costco, like, waiting for his car, like, the tire needed to get changed. And so we were just, like, waiting. And then he's like, you know, when you look at other guys, like, what are you thinking? Like, what do you mean? Like, when was I looking at another guy? I'm a lesbian. Like, I wasn't looking at another guy. But he was so sure that I was, like, checking someone else out in front of him. And I'm like, I don't even, like, remember what guy you're talking about. And it became, like, this whole huge fight. Anyway, so JP doesn't say that he was looking at anyone else here, but, like, Carlos assumes that he was. And then he gets mad. I should just drive us off the overpass. Luckily he didn't, but they get back to the hotel room. He's like, tell me what you fucking want. Tell me right now. Do you love me? And JP says no. And then he gets upset. And he goes off and calls his mom in the bathroom. And JP's like upset that the bond that he made with Carlos's mom is broken now. And Carlos is like, he's horrible. I can't believe this. He's fucking horrible. What do I do? What can I do? Then a long pause where his mother's advice must have been. And then he said, Nietzsche. With eager agreement, and I would long wonder, what quote from Nietzsche could have possibly suited this situation. So yeah, then Carlos comes back out. He's like, you're not gonna find anyone better than me. You never will. You're going to be miserable forever. You'll never have anyone love you. And then JP starts crying. They go back in the car, drive back to Carlos's parents' house. He stays with them for like one night before going back to Cash, and then JB doesn't sleep in Carlos's room this time. He sleeps in the sister's room, old room, which is now a guest room. And also Carlos decided that he wants to become a doctor like his parents and his sister, so he tells them that, and they're like really excited. And yeah, then Carlos, okay. So JP's sleeping in the sister's room, but then he feels Carlos comes into the room and like joins him in bed, and then he starts rubbing his feet and massaging them. He massaged my feet with his clammy hands and then wrestled next to me. He pulled me close to him, pushed his erection up against my back, and whispered in my ear, breath bearing down my cheek, I love you. I will always love you. You don't have to love me back, but you don't have to do anything at all. Just let me love you, John Paul. Let me love you. So then he goes back to Cash. He tweeted, he says he had a Twitter account that he rarely used, and he said, I think I just got sexually assaulted, but then he deleted the tweet after it got some replies. And then so back when he's like, he gets the message in the future, he's like really upset about it. He scrolls up on the message and sees like that Carlos had reached out to him before and he'd responded. He's like, hey Carlos, I'm good, just busy with work, how about you? And they just like had a friendly conversation. But now he's like, how could I have done that? You know, he feels like he betrayed himself. Mars in the 7th house ruling the 12th house, self-sabotage when it comes to relationships. Anyway, yeah, so he feels like he betrayed himself, but now he realizes that like he's changed. There was like with the Me Too movement and stuff, there was a period of public reckoning for people who'd experienced sexual assault. Every week was a new story about an abuse of power, an unwanted advance, a time to reconsider the past and whether or not we were okay with it. And so that must have changed him and how he thought about that experience. And now he doesn't respond, he doesn't block him either. And so yeah, he feels like that's freedom and he's like happy with the way that he's changed. Moving on. Okay, how to decide who to be. Hola Papi, how do I become more confident in my identity? Signed, imposter syndrome. There's this guy Miguel that he's dating, and Miguel has these friends that work on a cruise liner. So JP goes to the like bar, I guess, that they're all gonna hang out. Miguel's not there yet, and he's talking to 2 of his friends, and they're deciding whether they like him or not. Then Miguel shows up, and it seems like everyone in the bar knows him. And yeah, these 2 girls, they like, they told me about their cruise liner lifestyle, docking here and there, scurrying out, drinking, fucking, and then returning to their cots. Miguel approved of all this. It seemed as he met their adventures with nods of his head. That's the way to go about it, he said. He'd activate, widen his eyes or clap his hands when one of the girls confessed to undoing some staple of convention of being a person. Having a job, getting an apartment, entering a relationship. All things they didn't do because they were living on a boat. All things Miguel agreed should be disposed of. So he kind of like doesn't want to like have any identity. Like anytime like JP says he's Mexican, and then Miguel's like, what does that mean? And JP's like, I'm not sure. And he does the same thing to one of the girls. He says, what do you mean you're broke, huh? What does that mean? He just kind of like interrogates. Any assertion of identity was a serious and misguided thing that needed to be interrogated until it went away. So then they're like, JB says he kind of likes this. They're walking back down the streets of, they're in San Jose del Cabo, and they're walking down the street holding hands, and at one point Miguel's like, oh, are you uncomfortable holding hands in public? You don't have to be. JP's like, he says he's not, but Miguel insists that he is. Oh, you're afraid to hold my hand in the street is what he asks. JP says, I'm not. And he says, you are. Maybe it was the fact that Miguel had the face of a statue, never smiling or laughing or even frowning, that lent him such authority to define things, even things about me, things deep in my interior. He didn't wield this irresponsibly, I thought. He was right after all. And then he says, you don't have to be, as in afraid to hold my hand. Then JP says, I wasn't entirely sure, imposter, if I agreed with what Miguel thought about identity, but about the very nature of being. I admired it, sure, as one might admire any intriguing alien philosophy in a book. But it didn't seem to me that Miguel, powerful and authoritative, and resistant to the passions and wiles of human folly as he seemed to be, had escaped the identity trap. It was just that he had defined his in the negative. He was, as determined by things he wasn't. He avoided roots, he rejected labels, he ignored traditions and borders and ritual human endeavors like employment and housing. But didn't all that in the end, and despite his best efforts, aggregate to an experience, a point of view, a life? That was bad news for me, as for a brief moment I saw an opportunity for escape in Miguel. The truth is, imposter, I didn't want to be anything. I didn't want to be defined by silly notions like geography or nationality, sexuality or profession, by the rigid titles I could only ever aspire to and never fully embody. But maybe we aren't meant to embody them, and maybe there's some freedom to be found there. Maybe there's a way to draw from both, to recognize that we are unknowable beings that exist beyond language, and to recognize that we must at times simply decide that what we are and keep it moving if we are to move forward at all. Maybe we're not so much imposters as we are actors. So that whole bit about like, it sounds very Piscean to me, like Sun in Pisces. Like Pisces is a water sign, and it's like Cancer as a water sign is like very focused on family, like it cares very much about like their in group, but like people outside of it kind of aren't that important to them. Scorpio is very like, it's fixed water, so it's kind of like very intense. And I think Scorpio can focus on like maybe one person a lot, or like one thing. But Pisces wants like everyone, it wants to be a part of everything. It's like part of the whole, like transcendent. So like JP saying like he wanted an escape from identity is very Piscean. And then the like, maybe we're not so much imposters as we are actors. That to me is like the Sun in Pisces ruled by the Jupiter in Leo, where Leo is like the performer. So he's like, yeah, just he wants to escape the identity, but he recognizes that like there's like we have to have some sort of identity in order to be a person. And so maybe we just have to decide what we are. Maybe we just have to act like what we want to be. And they're in this like, he says an exposed room without walls, curled up on a hammock. And he's like, it's sad, I think, he said, being Miguel. And how did I know exactly what he was referring to, imposter? How did I know he was looking at the sky, which should have been pitch black and dotted with stars, but was instead milky and pale with lights from the resorts, the restaurants, the bars, and other human arrangements in Cabo? Even this, huh? He said dolefully and then repeated himself. Even this. Okay, so this one's called How to Spend the Night, the next chapter. The question is, Hola Papi, how do I let go of a relationship that never was? This one's kind of hard to summarize because it's like a relationship that didn't happen. But basically, so first off, he meets, when he's in Barcelona, which he said before in the chapter about Carlos, he's like, my study abroad year in Barcelona, I don't know if it was a year. Studying abroad in Barcelona was like terrible. And then here he says like, I met Stefan when I was studying abroad in Barcelona. I'd lied earlier. Oh, by the way, I lied about entirely hating my Barcelona experience earlier. Or, well, at least I overlooked some things. So he meets Stefan. He's a German guy who's, I guess, on vacation. I don't know if he's also studying abroad. Anyway. Oh, they probably met on a dating app or website. So yeah, they meet in Barcelona. JP decides he's in love with him. He goes to Germany eventually to like meet up with him, and he decides that they're in love, and they like hang out and drink together and have sex, but then they quickly decide, we ate, drank, met his friends, had sex, and quickly decided we weren't supposed to be together. So that didn't work out, but then he took him and his other friend Lucas to a party, and then JP decides that he's in love with Lucas. He says, I immediately fell in love with him rather than taking my time to decide. And why did I love Lucas passing? Well, Lucas was kind and tall and curious about the customs of people he'd never met, about the hobbies of his acquaintances, about the way everyday citizens of faraway places got around. So that to me sounds very Aquarian, because it's not like, he's not just curious about like traveling to other places, he's curious about the customs of people. Aquarius is like the humanitarian sign, about like community, people he never met, hobbies of his acquaintances, the everyday citizens of faraway places. So, and then JP has I mean, I'm assuming Lucas has some sort of Aquarius placements, and then JP has Saturn in Aquarius. So that's like very limiting. So this is the guy that he, like, the relationship that never happened, not Stefan. But anyway, so they go to a party. He's talking to Lucas a lot, and he says, "We didn't even kiss that night, but drunk and boarding the train back to Dortmund at 4 in the morning, I was giddy. I was as giddy as if we'd had." So then before he leaves Germany, he says, "The day before I left Germany, I got a WhatsApp message from Lucas. You fly out of Dusseldorf, yes? I live here. You can come stay the night. You leave so early." So he goes to Lucas's place, and they like have a magical night. I think they only kiss. I don't think they have sex, but JP tells him he'll write him a good love letter, and Lucas says, "Yes, I will wait for it. I will cherish it." And then we never ended up getting together in any formal way. The fantasy wilted almost as quickly as it had bloomed, but I didn't mind it so much. He goes back to Germany 2 years later. Stefan moved to Leipzig. And he says, "You will come and we will have a big party. I will invite Lucas and everyone from last time. Lucas is so excited to see you." And so clearly the idea of loving Lucas wasn't as dead as I thought. I hated myself for how quickly I booked my flight, for how utterly guided I was by my sillier notions of romance. So he's like getting his hopes up that him and Lucas might reconnect and like something will happen. But when he gets to Germany, he's talking to Stefan and he says, "Lucas isn't coming. Ah, yes, so strange. I told him you were coming and he seemed excited, but he has decided in the end to stay in Dusseldorf." So Lucas doesn't show up. JP says, "Oh, we will have fun anyway." And Stefan says, "Of course." And so he's like sad. He's crying about a relationship that never happened. So that's the only thing astrologically I really got from that was the Aquarius thing. But again, like Mars being like one of his more challenging planets in the 7th house, like relationships like just don't really come that easily to him. And then how to see a comet in a room full of strangers. I love this chapter as a musical theater fan myself. I really liked, he says he goes to see Natasha Peer in The Great Comet of 1812, which is a musical. He says I would call it an opera because the whole thing is sung. There's no like spoken parts. But anyway, I digress. So he goes and it happens, his friend Aaron takes him to see it, and it happens to be like the farewell show, like the last show before they close it. So there's like a bunch of people. There's a girl in line like, "Oh my god, you know what you've gotten yourself into?" She's like wearing a shirt with the characters' faces on it, and like just a bunch of super fans that are like, have seen it a bunch of times, that are just there to see it for the last time. But he says, "The thing about that day, observer, was that I had considered trying to kill myself the night before. Yes, I had wanted to try to kill myself, but when push came to shove, I found I lacked the resolve." So he just takes a bunch of sleeping pills that ended up doing little more than conking me out for 15 hours and making my bones feel like crumbly white chalk when I finally woke up. I had a blinding headache too. And so for anyone who doesn't know, the character Natasha from Natasha Peer in The Great Comet of 1812, she's like engaged at the beginning of the play. She meets Andre, who's he goes off and fights the war, but they get engaged first, so she's waiting for him to come back. And then I think actually she might be engaged to him before the play starts. I don't remember. Anyway, I'm a huge fan. I don't even know, because I read the book, and the book is really long. I don't have it here. The book's really long, and the play is only like a small section of it, the opera. So anyway, Natasha's engaged to Andre. He's out fighting the war, and then there's a man named Anatole who comes in and introduces himself. He's kind of like a playboy. It says like he spends his money on women and wine. And he likes Natasha, and he wants to have sex with her, but someone, his sister Helene, is married and like she's having an affair, and then by the end of the book she's having like 2 affairs with 2 different men, and then she loves them both so much that she like dies because she's like confused. She doesn't know which man she loves, but neither of them are her husband, who's Pierre. Natasha starts falling for Anatole, and Anatole comes up with this plan to like steal Natasha away and like take her to Poland. I think they're in Russia. It's a Russian novel. They're in Moscow. So she's staying at her like aunt's house in Moscow, and Anatole decides to like steal her and bring her to Poland, which like he's already married in Poland. And so like, yeah, the plan gets like, she gets caught. They catch Anatole when he like comes to the house, and Natasha's like really upset, and she tries to poison herself with arsenic. So JD he says he doesn't really understand musical theater in general, really, as I so often stood in my own way of it. Seeing living, breathing actors on stage only prompted me to imagine their lives, their little apartments in Brooklyn, the drinks they'd have after this was done, the backstage with its whispered admonishments of words of encouragement and secret relationships, romantic and otherwise, tangling everything up in scandalous knots. So usually he can't really get into like live performances of theater, but this one, since like he kind of related to Natasha a little bit, that's pretty much at the end. And he says like, since it's the last show, people are clapping so much that it's kind of hard to hear what's happening at times. So he's having trouble like, but I'm sure he's read War and Peace, so he knows a little bit. But anyway, by the end he's like able to relate to the character, and so he like gets into it more. And yeah, I haven't seen the show, so he's talking about the comet. I don't really know what's going on like in the play. He says it's a glorified lantern, and Pierre's singing, "The comet is said to portend untold horrors and the end of the world, but for me the comet brings no fear. No, I gaze joyfully." And then he thinks, "Let it be your comet. It can be your comet too. Let it be your comet." And so he like lets himself get into the show, and he starts crying along with the like super fans that have seen the show 1,000 times. Probably not 1,000, but like I think the girl he's talking to at the beginning says she's seen it 5 times. Yeah. I don't really have anything astrological to say about that. Like, I don't know what house musical theater would fall into. So I guess, but I did put some notes about like, since he tried to kill himself, that's another like Chiron in the 8th house, because somebody tweeted like, I don't want to say it, they said like, don't stop putting this F slur on my timeline or something, and they put a picture of JP's face, and he was like, I knew that there would be people who didn't like me, but I didn't need the evidence of it. And he was already like drunk when he saw that, and so it just like amplified the like negativity for him, and so he took the sleeping pills, thinking that like there was so much out there that could like hurt him. There was so many like words that he'd written that he didn't necessarily believe in, that were online, that maybe he just wrote to fill a quota or a deadline or something. And so like there was all this stuff, all this like ammunition out there that could be used against him. And so he just wanted to like, not that he wanted to die, he just wanted to not be. So yeah, that was very like Chiron in the 8th house to me. Where again, Chiron is our deepest wound, and the 8th house is like death. So like, again, trying to kill yourself would be like a wound related to death. Anyway, I don't want to like dwell on that too much though. So okay, moving on. How to answer a letter, part 2. So this is, he returns to the question that he received in the first chapter about homosexuality being illegal, but this guy thinking he has a crush on a guy he works with, and he doesn't know if he likes him back or if he should do anything about it. And basically JP says that like he was debating like whether he should even answer it or not, whether he was the right person to say it, and he says, I don't answer the man's letter. I don't attempt something I can't do. This is wisdom too, I think. This is helping in another way. If my voice might do more harm than good, then I am not the voice that needs to speak, even if I am in love with the sound of my own voice. That was very like just Sagittarius rising ruled by Jupiter and Leo. Like the Sagittarius is like this is wisdom too, I think. And then the Jupiter being like, even if I am in love with the sound of my own voice. So I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah. And then one other thing I want to say, I didn't really talk about his parents that much, but like in the acknowledgements, here we go. He says, I would first like to thank my mom, Madre, who read books aloud to me as a kid and never asked me to switch out of my artistic passions for more practical pursuits, my sister Alex for being my best buddy, and my dad, Padre, for letting me be myself despite all the data saying it would be a bad idea. So in my last video about Jeanette McCurdy, I kind of talked about like the debate of the 10th house and the 4th house, where the like I think a lot of wasabi like traditional astrologers assign like the father to the 4th house and the mother to the 10th house, or I don't know if that's all. Like I think astrology used to be like very like patriarchal, and I think that's changing a little now, but it was like definitely like male astrologers would read for male clients. And so like when you read about like I have a book about electional astrology and stuff, and it's about like a lot of the things about marriage, or like if you get married under this like at a time like this, like your wife will like be too talkative and like blah blah, and it's just kind of like just seems really sexist. But anyway, so I think traditionally like the 4th house was like the parent, which is like the father because it's the only one that mattered, and then like people had decided like in more recent years, I guess, like the 4th house was like the father, and then like derivative houses, the spouse of the father is the mother, so that's mother in the 10th house. But this one to me, when he's talking about his parents, seems like one of the cases where like the 4th house would be the mother and the 10th house would be the father, because he says his mom like read books aloud to him and never asked me to switch out of my artistic passions for more practical pursuits. So that to me is more like Piscean. And then his dad let him be himself despite all the data saying it was a bad idea, like the data part being very like Virgoan. So that to me, like if I were to like talk about his parents more, I would probably do like the mom as the 4th house and the dad is the 10th house. But again, he doesn't really talk about his parents that much. Anyway, so that's the end of the book. So if you want to hear more from JP, he's an author, illustrator, columnist from rural Oklahoma. He currently lives in Brooklyn. He runs the popular advice column Hola Papi on Substack. I used to read this like every week, but he put it on Substack and now it's behind a paywall, which is so sad because I'm like, my videos aren't monetized, so I'm not making any money. But if you want to read them, they're very good. Lots of good advice on there. Although he doesn't answer questions that are above his pay grade, you know? And yeah, he's on Blue Sky. It says you can keep up with him on Twitter on this. How outdated. He's on Blue Sky now. I just made an account like a couple, like maybe last week, I don't know. But yeah, he's pretty active on there. So you can search John Paul Brammer on there. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. Should I read more from Chani Nicholas? So I'll read what she says about Pisces sun, and you can see like how accurate it seems, and then Aries moon, because the Aries moon one is pretty short. So she says, in this mutable, double-bodied water sign, your sun in Pisces wants to move in every direction. Water without a container soaks itself into the seams of every surface it can reach. Being both moist and mutable makes your personality one that is malleable, sometimes gullible, adaptive, reflective, and elusive. Here your sun encourages you to develop a personality that gathers influences from as many sources as possible. Your sun in Pisces cannot help but permeate your environment, giving you the reputation for being compassionate, kind, empathetic, and pacifistic. A natural nurse, healer, artist, and poet, your sun in Pisces is most likely talented at leaving an impression on the world. Pisces is a highly fertile sign, and here your sun shines by being versatile. You are re-energized by having as many experiences both in and beyond the physical world as possible. That isn't to say that there is no need for times of rest and deep reflection. Like all water signs, Pisces needs to recuperate the emotional energy it puts out. Like all mutable signs, Pisces might also feel drained from its attention being dispersed too widely. The symbol for this sign is two fish swimming in different directions, bound by a cord. The symbol encapsulates the paradox at the heart of this persona. Much like two people rowing in different directions in the same boat, Pisces can spend a lot of its energy swimming in circles. Perhaps this whirlpool effect eventually leads to another dimension, but the sun in Pisces is a personality that is often torn, wanting to experience everything, talented at many things, and easily bored by consistency. Lines are far from linear for you. You swim to the rhythm, or lifelines are far from linear. You swim to the rhythm of your own streams, following along the currents of your own life rather than following a set path. You may be known for having a mystical, elusive quality. Others might get mad about it, but you can evaporate at a moment's notice. Your sun in Pisces is a great escape artist. When distorted, Pisces can end up a martyr, wandering, unstructured, distracted, lost, dazed, and confused. Pisces has a penchant for picking up every stray cat and broken-winged bird. Compassion is the most honorable quality, but without a healthy amount of discernment, it's of little use. If you have the sun in Pisces, you always benefit from learning more about your personal boundaries. That knowledge is vital. It is not your responsibility to heal everyone, or anyone for that matter. And then the moon in Aries. The moon is the cardinal fire sign. The moon in the cardinal fire sign of Aries is action-oriented. Daily life will most likely be adventurous. Taking action may be a form of self-care. Taking initiative may be a way of helping you feel safe in the world. Taking on challenges is necessary for you to feel vital and alive. With this placement, independence and freedom are a must to feel emotionally centered, though the level of independence you will need very greatly, depending on the rest of your chart. Regular release of excess heat can be important for your emotional well-being. Feelings can flare, but not permanently, as Aries is quick to change. With this placement, it is common to have had a hot-tempered, independent, or courageous parent or caregiver, someone who wasn't reliant on others for their sense of self and encouraged you to be the same, or someone who felt a little too fiery to get close to in the ways you may have needed. So that last bit reminded me of like when he was in middle school and like said like wanted to kill himself, and then they like went out to eat after, and his car door hit the other person, and his mom like stood up for him and was like yelling at the lady. I think it was a lady who was like, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" You know, and she was like, "You have no idea what kind of day he's had. It was an accident." And then also the like little too fiery to get close in the ways you may have needed reminded me of like the chapter with Carlos and his mom, and he said he was able to talk to Carlos's mom about his writing and stuff in a way that he didn't really talk to his own parents about his art. He didn't think parents were people that you needed to like share your like art with necessarily, but he liked being able to talk to Carlos's mom about it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess I'll plug my music channel now. I also have a music channel, Julia Emily Music. I wrote a Valentine's Day album that I put out last year. And then I've been doing like a lot of covers. I have other albums that I'm working on with original music. So I'll link that in the description, probably just the Valentine's Day album, and then if you want to see the rest, you can go from there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Read Hola Papi, how to come out in Walmart, how to come out in a Walmart parking lot, and other life lessons if you haven't already. It's very good. I skipped a lot of the good stuff. So that's it. All right, thank you so much for watching. Bye.